Welcome! Thank you for coming this evening. We are thrilled to have you here because tonight we are unveiling our latest research here at the Real Love Institute. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Real Love Institute, let me just give you a little bit of background. We study love, specifically romantic love, and we are most interested lately in the idea of finding a soulmate and that kind of romantic love that Hollywood makes so much money off of. You see, what we think is really fascinating is that there's this myth, well, we like to assume it's a myth, that these kind of loves happen kind of mysteriously, magically, with a certain kind of serendipitous quality to it. I mean, even those people that use, back in the old days, matchmakers, and lately the algorithms of dating sites, still rely on, when those two people come together, something happening that clicks. Well, at the Real Love Institute, we believe that there's no mystery to it at all. That click can be engineered. There can be a clear path to love. Which is why, this evening, I would like to introduce you to our subject, Julie. Now, we've chosen her, particularly because we believe that the formula and the experiment that we are conducting will transcend a subject that is even potentially not interested in being in a relationship. I mean, when I was little, I don't really remember if anyone ever asked me, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? But if they did, I don't recall that I had an answer like astronaut or doctor or whatever, but I do remember feeling very clearly that I wanted to be in a relationship. Like, it wasn't a wedding fantasy or any of that kind of thing. In fact, I don't really know why or where I got that idea, because it's not like I had any models for that. I was raised by a single mother. My grandmother wasn't married. It was like, what was I referring to? I mean, it was rather vague, and, you know, frankly, I'm a little bit more specific now. But it was a real clear hit, and, you know, almost 50, I'd have to say that, by and large, I haven't been very successful in that. So this is why we think Julie is the perfect subject for our experiment. For two main reasons. One, you just heard her say that she has spent the majority of her adult life longing to be in a relationship. In fact, 97% of her adult years, which is what we will focus on here at the Real Institute, Real Love Institute, 97% of those adult years have been spent longing to be in a relationship, yet 15% of those adult years have been spent in actual relationship. What's interesting about those numbers is there's a little overlap, right? You might have figured it out. Some of those years in relationship were spent longing to be in relationship, but we won't get to that this evening. She did have 2 relationships, most recently. And what's interesting is at the end of those 2 relationships, she has reported feeling what she says liberated from the longing of being in relationship. Now, though this is what she states, according to our tests, we do detect, albeit very low levels for a woman of her age, but there is an existence of a desire to be in a relationship. So this is one of the first things why we think she's perfect for this experiment. The second thing is, in this feeling liberated from the longing of being in a relationship, she has, for her, unusually high levels of feeling confident and good feelings of self-worth that were not existent in the longing to be in relationship state. Very interesting. I mean, she's actually used the word perfect to describe herself. Now, as scientists, we really can't subscribe to that word. Perfection is an anomaly, but we did do some interviews, and they're not unfounded, that perception. She is what's considered the whole package. She's smart, attractive, funny, intelligent, creative, generous, successful, and this is what drives our research. This question, why is this woman single? I mean, it's kind of like I've had a huge meal and I just don't have an appetite anymore like I used to. I mean, that kind of craving, longing, yearning for a relationship, I mean, it's fucking exhausting. Frankly, I'm glad it's gone. You know, I mean, fuck, years. Do you know how horrible it is to long for something that you can't really just go out and get? I mean, I've changed things in my life, jobs, and, you know, created goals and achieved them, but like setting a goal of a relationship, you can't really do that on your own. It requires that somebody else has to think that that's a good idea too. And my strategy really had just been to chase unavailable people, mostly my straight female friends. So I had a really, you know, long losing streak on that. And so to let go and to feel liberated, frankly, feels great. I mean, I did have 2 relationships, you know. I mean, after I was like single for 12 years, like flatline, like nothing happening for 12 years, I had 2 relationships. I mean, like one after the other, consecutively. I dated 2 women named Susan. Consecutive Susans. I mean, you can't make this shit up. So while the body of evidence that we looked at for the entirety of the adult life of the subject is being taken into consideration, we did choose to focus the data primarily on the last 2 relationships, the consecutive Susans that she referred to, which we will call 1 and 2. See, she described those 2 relationships as sort of being 2 halves of potentially a greater whole. In fact, she used this metaphor of a Reese's peanut butter cup. When she was a child, there were commercials on the television about Reese's peanut butter cups that talked about, you know, these 2 great ingredients, right? You got chocolate, you got peanut butter, they're both worthy, great qualities, but somehow they mysteriously like bump into each other and something magical happens, and together they make a greater whole. And so she's looking for the Reese's peanut butter cup, and that metaphor inspired our research, and we thought we could come up with the perfect formula, taking the ideal ingredients from both of these, doing a little gap analysis, because we know it can't be so simple as 1 + 1, right? Do a little gap analysis on what might have been missing. You combine all of that, and it would seem that it would be almost impossible for the subject to not experience a good relationship. So what I'd like to do now is introduce the formula to you. Starting with number 1, we have the primary ingredient being companionship. Now, these 2 had a lot in common, shared interests in art and spirituality, liked to take road trips to places that other people didn't really want to go to. It looked really good. So, you know, after being single for 12 years with like nothing going on, I mean, like, well, chasing all of those unavailable women, I decided I really needed to be more proactive and make some different choices and try to create something different in my life. So I thought, okay, Cupid. I had a plan, and I had 1 rule that I was going to keep to myself: no friends. You see, that whole like chasing unavailable friends, like, that wasn't going to happen. So I figured, you know, I mean, a dating site, first of all, they're lesbians, so that's good. And secondly, they want to be in a relationship. So I am already like ahead of the curve, I'm thinking. So I just had a 100% no tolerance about the friends for anyone who thought that I was so interesting and funny and I would be such a great friend. No, I have enough friends, okay? So I met number 1. She was maybe like the 7th person I've met, and I don't know if you've ever been on a blind date before, but you kind of get a hit, you know, sort of immediately, at least for yourself, and sometimes you can tell for the other person. Even if you're interested, you can kind of see that they're not really into it. Well, number 1 and I went for a walk that went on for hours. hours, and we talked about all kinds of things and shared deep emotional secrets and laughed well past the sun setting. And at the end of that, she seemed interested and wanted to spend more time with me. Seemed like a good sign. So we went on a couple more dates, I guess. I don't know. I couldn't tell. I mean, she kept asking me to go on like hikes and go to the movies and meet her friends, but there was still like nothing really happening. And frankly, this was exactly what I promised myself I was not going to do. I mean, I needed to know, was she interested in me? So I asked her in an email. Are you interested in me? Her response, well, I'm not interested. What do you mean? I mean, I've been chasing unavailable people. That was like a hell yes as far as I was concerned. This was excellent. So we dated for like a year and a half, and we got along really well. And the only time we ever had any challenges was really kind of around that same question. And finally, towards the end, or what was going to be the end, I didn't know, I asked her, do you want to be dating me? And she said, I want to date someone like you. So I guess, like, specifically not me. So companionship is a really important ingredient that we'd like to include in this formula. Which brings us to number 2. Number 2 provided a critical ingredient that was missing from number 1. And put very simply, chemistry. Chemistry, chemistry. The chemistry was great. I mean, I'd actually never really experienced chemistry before. I never really got it because, like, I already had enough of my own chemistry and all these unavailable people. I was like, I'm into you. Why are you into me? Like, I never really understood what it was like when two people were into each other. So this was exciting, and it was like fuel, and it enabled me to kind of overlook a lot of other things. Conversation, curiosity about the world. I mean, hell, I had friends for that, right? I didn't have chemistry with my friends. It was okay. I mean, I bought a deck of cards of questions to help us, like, have more deep conversations. It seemed okay. But the chemistry, it was great. And, you know, she only had really one requirement when it came to sex. And frankly, it was something that I hadn't really done before and wasn't really sure that I was going to be any good at it or even like it. So I was a little nervous, but I was committed because she was hot, okay? So it turns out that I am pretty good at it. And I actually enjoyed it too. So one night, I'm working my way down her body the way that I would, pausing here and there just long enough to stir things up, but not to spark her impatience. And just as I am about to put my face between her legs, she says something to me. I wish that you made more money.
Oh my God.
What? It's too bad that you don't make more money. And I'm thinking, like, there hasn't been anything that we haven't been able to do or that I wasn't interested in doing, and, like, does she need to see a bank statement? I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. Anyways, I went back to my usual process and things came to their natural conclusion. I actually chose to not revisit that topic, kind of just let it go, you know? And I think it was a couple weeks later, she broke up with me after the rodeo. I mean, the rodeo. Like, who wouldn't go to the rodeo? I'm not a cowboy, but it's kind of interesting. The cow palace, big animals, different kind of people. But I guess it was kind of the last straw for her, you know? I mean, how could you not be curious about the rodeo, even for one night? So there you have the two main ingredients, right? Companionship and chemistry. Now, what we're doing is a little more complicated than making candy here, okay? So we did take a look at the gap analysis. What's missing? We have these two things together, and yet the subject we wanted to address, as you might recall, what she described in the beginning, that feeling of longing that had been so prevalent in her life, and the absence of a feeling of confidence or self-worth. We wanted the subject to have the experience of being in a relationship that didn't mean that she had to give up things that were important to her or feel less about herself in order to be with someone. So we addressed that gap with a proprietary ingredient that we developed here at the Real Love Institute. And of course, it's available to each of you, should you be interested. And we have applied it to the subject. Now, we just want to make one point here. At the Real Love Institute, we are not advocates that relationships are important, primary, intimate relationships. That we're not saying that people who are single haven't had meaningful lives or don't live fulfilled lives. That is not our point of view at all. There are some people, and the subject in particular, in which this is an experience that she desired to have. In addition, she has invested a tremendous amount of time in personal development and evolving what she calls her soul's journey. And that the experience of relationship is something that she feels will take her further than she's able to go on her own. So what we would like to do is invite you back to this very auditorium in the not too distant future when we will unveil the certain successful results of our experiment. And in the interim, we invite you to notice and observe the subject in her natural habitat. And as things start to change for her, as they will, we are certain, she might tell you stories about mystical, magical happenings with this person. It's very compelling. Even though she knows about the experiment, she will tell you these things. But we ask you to use your logical minds and understand there's no mystery at all. It is simply a perfect formula at work. Thank you for coming this evening, and have a good night.